Hi, my name is Liz Stevens. Today I'm talking about a study done seeing how caregivers' involvement in CWS affected their mental health over time. This study was done in September 2015, and the authors were Mary Ackery, Geetha Gopalana, Marina Leonce, and Mary M. McKay. For starters, CWS stands for Child Welfare System. This is services and organizations focused on child's well-being, safety, happiness, etc. And for the most part, caregivers within the system already struggle a lot. A lot of them report poverty, homelessness, stress, and feeling isolation. It was also assumed that caregivers weren't seeing mental health services, even though they were so stressed out. And for the most part, this study was looking at whether caregivers' depression was higher than the general adult population's depression, basically seeing if CWS involvement affected their depression. As for methods, this was a secondary study. The group was already selected by the National Institute of Mental Health for a multiple family group model of trying to find ways to reduce childhood disruptive behavior disorder. This was just they just tagged it along. The approval was made by Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and this was an observational study. As for methods, there were initially 320 volunteers just based on interest, but they lowered the group down to 129 using these specific criteria. Number one, they had past or current involvement in CWS. Number two, they were at least 18 years of age and fluently spoke Spanish or English, and their child of care was between 7 to 11 years old and met the criteria for ODD or CD. ODD is oppositional defiant disorder, which is described by Mayo Clinic as pattern of anger, irritability, arguing, and defiance towards parents and other authority figures. This is often said to be caused by pre-existing problems like parenting or abuse history. CD means conduct disorder and is described by John Hopkins as antisocial behavior, irresponsibility, running away, stealing, and harming others. And once again, this was also said to be caused by treatment or events in their life, and possibly also by genetics in the family. And these two disorders were kind of ranked based on Iowa Connors rating scale. Some basic statistics for the caregivers: 46% of them were single, 90.7% were mothers, 37% were unemployed. As for children, 65% of them were male, 40% of them were Hispanic, and 34% were Black or African American. As for the procedure, they took 13 different mental health hospitals or clinics in New York City from 2006 to 2010 for this study, and they tested 4 different points, and they tested depression and their mental health service use. Baseline is prior to the study, mid-test was 8 weeks into the study, post-test was immediately following the study or immediately following their CWS involvement. And they also had a follow-up 6 months after they were done with their involvement. As for measures for depression, they use a psychodemographic questionnaire, which is simply just a sheet where they list out a bunch of symptoms and ask, have you felt blank in the past week? And you answer using 0 to 3, 0 being I haven't felt it at all this past week, or 3 being I felt it just about every day this week. And they just do that for all the different types of symptoms. And the way they scored this was the epidemiological scale, which goes 0 to 60 based on what you answered, 0 through 3. For scores between 60 and 26, they were clinically diagnosed as mild depression, and 27 plus was considered severe depression. As for service use, it was just a yes or no question. Have you used mental health services since the last checkup? And they didn't really go into specifics about what mental health services they were getting. They use Stata version 13 statistical software to analyze this data. They did this to make means and percentages and other sort of statistics about the group. They also perform some bivariate analysis and tests. The analysis is examining the relationship between depression status and child welfare system involvement. And the test was examining the relationship between depression status and service use while keeping child welfare service involvement in mind. The biggest thing found from the study was that 65.55% of the 129 caregivers met or exceeded clinical criteria for depressive disorder. Another big statistic found by this study was that throughout this study, a range of 32.5% and 52.8% of caregivers with depressive disorder did not receive mental health services at that time. Some other big results in comparison to the 65.5% of caregivers that had depressive disorder, non CWS involved caregivers or parents at baseline, about 53.3% of them had depression. So there was more in the caregivers than those not involved in CWS. The average baseline score for depression was 27.05, which is right about that severe score that we mentioned. And the standard deviation for the score was about 8.9. So some of them were in the 30s and some of them were in the lower 20s. Now, this study is mainly important because it shows us proof of just how much caregivers need support and need help. Their environments are very much stressful, just as much as it is for the children. And seeing people struggle can often affect your own mental health. And these sort of findings can help the CWS in the future give resources for these caregivers and families to hopefully try and improve how they feel, which could possibly even improve their treatment. As for the hypothesis of that CWS involved caregivers will have higher depression rates than those not involved, this was only supported at baseline. So the only time we saw this was the 65 and the 53%. The rest of the study, they were just about equal. So it can't really say for sure if CWS involvement affected their depression or gave them more depression than those not involved. Nonetheless, the CWS involvement depression rates were 2/3 higher than what was previously claimed by other studies done before this, which is pretty significant. As for limitations, they were not specific on what child welfare system involvement was. More specifically, like if they were currently involved or they had past involvement. They didn't separate that out. They also didn't include variations of CWS. Once again, they were just looking at this family model group, so they weren't really considering any other sort of treatments that might also have different effects on mental health. Children's ages was also a big thing. They were just looking at 7 to 11-year-olds, nothing apart from that. And obviously, different ages might have different types of symptoms of their disorders. They also weren't specific on what service uses they were looking at. And so it was kind of more up to the caregivers of being like, did what I get qualify as a mental health service or not, which could have affected the scores for that. But all in all, that is it for this study. I really like this study. It hits kind of close to home as someone who's gotten mental health services before. And it definitely kind of shows of how your environment can most definitely affect your mental health and such, and how caregivers are extra vulnerable to mental health struggles being in those types of environments, and how they should be supported just as much as the children in these services. And hopefully these types of studies will help give CWS and other organizations inspiration to hopefully get some more resources for these caregivers, because if they're supported, then they can support their kids more, which might lead to better results in treatment. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.